else in Asia. Welcome to the first in the relaunch of Teachers Meets Businesses. My name's Chris Geary. I'm the CEO and co-founder of BSD Education. And just for all of you who are joining us today, whether you're here in the Zoom meeting or you're joining us live on YouTube, one of the things that we recognized over almost a decade now of working with educators all around the world is, there's a greater recognition of the connection between preparing students for the world of work in the future whilst they're in school and whilst they're during their education. And at the same time, there's that, it's so important to ensure that educators can be up to date on the developments of the world of work. It's hard enough to keep on top of all of this while we're in the world of work. And so, if you're in the world of education, then it's going to be even harder. So what we want to do is we provide these webinar series to keep everyone up to date and also to bring connection with some of the top business executives and entrepreneurs from all around the world who can really tell us all about what's going on. So today, we're going to touch on some of the opportunities for inclusion in the future of work. We're going to look at the impacts and some of the disruptions of technology and maybe the way that people engage with businesses, the ways that people go about work and the way that has changed. I mean, obviously, for many of us, our working days are unrecognizable now than what they were a couple of years ago. And we're also going to explore something about what all of this might mean for opportunities in the future of work. And it gives me enormous pleasure today to have the opportunity to converse with a great friend of mine, Joanne Phal, who's based in Bangkok. Joanne and I actually met back in kind of 2014, 2015, right of the earlier days of his entrepreneurial journey and also my own. And, in the last 7-8 years, Joanne has become, it's an understatement to say one of the leading lights in technology innovations in the area of human capital, and more lately in ESG, so environmental sustainability investment. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Joanne. He can tell you a bit more about his own background, and he'll talk a little bit more on our topic today. So without further ado, Joanne, I'll hand over to you. And thank you very much again for joining us today.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope we have some fun together and some insights that will be useful for you. My name is John Phal, and I've been in the Southeast Asia space for more than 8 years. My background is I've created one of the first HR tech marketplace in Southeast Asia, specifically to recruit technology talents. So if you know names like Grab, Shopee, Lazada, but maybe Alibaba, and all these tech companies in the region, we've been helping them to recruit people. We started by recruiting them engineers, and then they asked us for designers, product managers, digital marketers, and then now it's pretty much everything from customer service to sales to even CEOs sometimes. So it's been 3 million tech talents that we have in the platform, probably around 70,000 companies. We've got investment from Alibaba, JobsDB, actually Seek Group, the owner of Job Street in Hong Kong, JobsDB, and a few others. And later on, I've got the chance to exit this company, cash out a little bit, and now I'm putting this money into a fund, which I'm starting, which is called Atlas Capital, which is looking specifically in green technologies and designing a green future of work. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the topic of today. I think the topic is diversity, inclusion, but from the angle of business, I would like to give it a little lens to be a little bit more about how technology can be inclusive. and how specifically employability as a driving factor of education needs to be inclusive through the adoption and inclusion of technology skill sets. I think this is really a topic we don't talk about enough. And I think to be useful to you, I'm gonna share you firstly some facts about what the future of work is looking like. And on the second part, I will be sharing with you how to adapt to that. And adapting is probably the big job of educators such as you guys, so they can be ready to be recruited by the market. All right, let's get into it. I'm gonna share my screen and share with you a couple of articles I've researched on, and you can find those pieces in my book that I wrote on the topic of future of work, and partially green future of work, the adaptive economy. And you can find that on my blog if you want to check it out. It's free, of course. So it's all started with this research, the adaptive economy. So 3 years ago, I was trying to write a book for my company. And the book was, what will be the technology recruitment in 2050? So what will tech companies look for when they hire graduates and talents in 2050? That book took me to places. I've got the chance to speak for The Economist. Here you can see the head of McKinsey, chairman of McKinsey Asia, alongside with the CEO of Udemy, and the head of investment of IFC. That was last year. And we're talking very much on that topic of inclusion for technology roles. Here's what I've put together at that time for them. So number one, as the adoption of new technologies is increasing at an exponential pace, the adoption of new skill sets to manage and to utilize those technologies is also increasing. You can see here in this graph, the years to adopt technologies. Electricity first took 45 years, around this time, 200 years ago. And then you can see television took 25 years. PC took almost 20 years. Smartphone took only 3 years to be reaching 25% of the US population. And that's mirroring also everybody else in the planet. Today, 5 billion people around the world have smartphones, and some of them don't even have a home with a roof on it, but they do have a smartphone. So the acceleration of the technology adoption is a fact. But what is important for you teachers and educators is how this correlates to the recruitment market and to the employability, right? And this is where we need to know where these technologies are affecting the most businesses and where they're affecting them the least, right? So this is a graph where you can see the least affected areas by technology and the most affected areas by technologies. Now, what is important is those two factors are basically designing what work will look like in 2050 and how educators, academies, schools, universities will prepare their students to be market ready will be very much correlated to these two big factors: adoption of technologies and areas of affection. So here are some of the facts of big changes we will see in the work towards 2050. Number one is fall of middle management. Business schools have made so much money and by having students like me to pay a master degree $50,000, $100,000, and to become mid managers, right? Not the owner, not the CEO, but middle management. And this is disappearing. And this is something that will disappear mainly due to the penetration of software management tools that are actually doing a better job than middle managers to keep teams delivering their deadlines on time. And that's leading to a second big fact in 2050. And actually today we do have already silicon bosses. So AI is replacing your manager. If you are Uber driver today, or if you're a Grab driver today, you don't have a boss, but actually you do have an AI boss. You have an app driven with AI that is telling you where to go, in how much time, how many minutes, and for how much money. And if you don't do that, you're basically getting fired. So Uber drivers have an AI boss, and that's Uber AI, managing millions of drivers in the same time. We're not talking about the future here. We're talking about today, actually the past, right? Another big one is partnering on AI in execution and decision. So I'll give you a very interesting example here. One company have been using before designers to create mock-ups of their next product, right? What's the next product will look like for cars, for example, or for kitchen products. Before they needed to have design experts and design managers, design architects to design those products. But today, actually the AI is creating those products for them. And then the sales manager just have to pick which one he wants to sell. So AI is actually facilitating all the decision on how a product should look like, as well as what audience this product should reach. Using tools like Facebook to do marketing, recommends you what audience and how much money you should spend for each audience. So all these decisions are quite important. Talking about budget and products are taken care by bots and AI. So then when we think about this, we really need to think, what are the values that humans will provide, right? And if you want the solutions of that big problem, you can look at this graph. This is some very interesting studies made with McKinsey that are looking at where the humans will be needed. And this is very much where schools and education providers will be getting their students. In these areas, these will be the areas where most people will pay school because they know the output of that school will be a high-paying jobs in these areas, right? Going through very quickly, of course, IT engineering will be, very high on demand. Towards 2030, we're expecting plus 16% increase. We're still seeing a forecast of traditional high white collar skill sets, such as doctors, teachers, lawyers, etc., plus 16% towards 2030. We're still seeing a big increase of very elementary blue collar skill sets, such as cleaners, helpers, food preparations, assistants, etc., plus 12% towards 2030. And you can see we're seeing a decrease of skilled manual labor, workers with their hands, machinery operators, as well as salespeople, service workers, waiters, etc. So this is another big thing that educators and teachers should prepare their teammates and the students, for, is tech-induced stress. Working 24/7, receiving notifications is something that you need to be ready for, and stress management is one thing. The rise of digital white collar in general will be to be expected as well. So now the question is, how do we adapt, right? And how do institutions like yours are anticipating that to create curriculum that are creating adaptability for these new workers that will graduate in 5-10 years to be ready to adapt to this increased pace of technology changes and workplace. This is where I can share with you the second part of my presentation, which is how to be adaptive and why to be adaptive. So I will start to be talking about why to be adaptive, showing you a very concrete example of companies that have not been adaptive and that are lost a lot. And on the other side, companies that have been adaptive and made so much more money than their competitors. So one example I like to share is this one. Everybody knows Nokia, right? We've all had our Nokia smartphone. At the time Apple started, Nokia was probably the biggest tech company in the world, right? And sitting on their high towers, high ivory towers, Nokia CEO was thinking nothing can break us, right? With the experience they had, with the team, human resources available, nothing could have stopped Nokia. But Nokia got attacked by an adaptive ecosystem, what we like to call an adaptive ecosystem. And I really like this quote from Martin Reeve, the chairman of BCG. It's really adaptive ecosystem that have attacked the monopoly in which some corporate were sitting, like Nokia. And these adaptive ecosystem adapting faster to technologies and to the output technologies can create, adapting faster how their team members are learning and how their team members are learning on a lifelong basis, not only at school, but during the whole life, have been defining the Apple success. You see, this is pretty much crazy to think of such a hockey stick, but this is what an adaptive ecosystem have been created. And this is why companies towards 2050 will be looking for, I believe, adaptive talents. Adaptive talents is what company will be looking for. So anybody creating those adaptive talents will probably be a stronger value proposition than just master in management, right? It's really about creating those adaptive talents. So companies like that, because looking at their numbers, companies that are failing to be adaptive are losing a lot more money, right? And so as you can see, the profitability of companies that are adaptive is a lot higher, very much quicker. And that's why I create this type of hockey sticks. So you can see some people like Bill Gates and Gary Hamel here were talking about how the adaptive quotient, how to become more adaptive, how to assess your adaptivity is an important factor for companies to recruit nowadays. And now the question is, how the company will be able to stay competitive? It will be with internal reorganization. So they will look at recruiting adaptive talents. They will look at adopting flexible technologies. They will look at using AI to produce predictive insights. And they will look at being more changeable through their org chart. And all of this is powered by their adaptive talents. So my recommendation and that's just my view, my humble view. I just have my limited experience, but my recommendation for any teachers or school owners would be to really try to produce more of these adaptive talents. Five takeaways to know if you as an educator, you're ready actually to teach adaptability, maybe is to test your own adaptability first, right? So how do you know yourself as an educator if you are adaptable and if your adaptive quotient is high enough, right? I think you can ask Chris. I'm sure there are programs that they are developing with that, within that space to make your software reaching adaptability, and maybe your knowledge and your mindset to change. But these are 5 takeaways I think I can give you today to see if you or your team member is adaptive enough. Number 1 is changing the thought process, right? So it's really about not thinking, what do you need to learn? It's really about thinking, how can you solve problems? Because knowing technology won't be useful as technology is being, moving so fast that you won't be able to use this technology you learned today 5 years from now, or even 3 years from now. So it's really about solving problems. It's not about learning how to learn anymore. We don't care about that already. We're just looking at solving problems. And be able to solve problem, it's been being able to identify the problem, being able to search what new solution exists in the market. And it's not based on your experience. It's based on what's up there in the market using internet to find those solutions, right? So it's not about learning how to learn. It's changing how your thought process is from learning to just being a problem solver. Number 2 is forcing everybody, including yourself, to take risk, right? So taking risk is not looking at something that we know to solve a problem. It's actually looking at new solutions that are in the market that just popped up maybe 1 year ago, but that could help solve this problem, right? This is being adaptable to the latest technology that is provided by the market. Third, it's encourage others to be open-minded. We talk a lot about hierarchy, and I think hierarchy is extremely important. I don't see any companies really working with everybody on the same level, unless there is at least somebody taking decisions. But even if there is hierarchy, you can be open-minded unless everybody have the voice to suggest new methods, to suggest what technologies should be used, and suggest new ways of solving problems. Number 4, it's embracing adaptive learning, right? So it's really much trying to understand at least and be curious, right? It's curiosity. I'm hearing so many people who are making 10, 20,000 US$ using Java, and they're like, oh, I don't need to learn any framework. I'm making $20,000 by using Java. Those people, I hope they make money today, because 5 years from now, nobody's gonna recruit them. And they would have lost the appetite of learning and learning new skills, so they won't make any money, right? So it's very important to use this adaptive learning opportunity to volunteer yourself into lifelong learning, so you can stay ahead of the curve. It's not about keeping up, it's really staying ahead of the curve. And lastly, you can take assessments, right? So there's many assessments out there that will help you to know how adaptive you are and what's your adaptability. So yeah, just check on yourself, and then once you have the results, check on your team to see how adaptive they are. So I think that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I hope I shared with you a glimpse of what the future of work is going to look like in 2030 and 2050. And I hope I shared with you some example of adaptive companies and why they will need adaptive talents, and how all that will drive inclusion for talents, because the talents that are adaptive will be the most paid, no matter what is their background, age, religion, sexual preferences. If they are adaptive, and if they have adaptability quotients that are high, those talents will make a lot of money and they will be welcomed in every corporate company. So this is, to me, the biggest factor of inclusion and diversity in the workplace. This is adaptability, and I hope you enjoyed the takeaways you've got today. Thank you.
John, thank you very much for all of that. Really, really interesting. I put a message on the chat for everyone, where they would like to ask any questions. Please do post your questions to the chat, and I will include them in this kind of part of the conversation. So we're gonna discuss a little bit more now. John, I've got a few questions for you, kind of in follow up, but one of the first things is, we've seen in, let's say, in the last couple of years, where people aren't necessarily centered around an office, or they're not necessarily centered around a city. The remote working culture of the world is something that has grown. At the same time, in education, we've seen students have learned from home. So it's clearly they're also going to be more prepared for taking on remote working opportunities in the future. My question is really about, as this maybe the paradigm of where people work has shifted as well, and thinking about adaptability, do you think that this is going to push towards a greater globalization of the best career opportunities? Or do you think that, regardless of rhetoric, companies aren't necessarily there yet? What's your opinion in terms of the globalization of the job market?
So one of the really big driving factor of work towards 2030, at least, if the pandemic continues, is remote work, right? And but I think this is something a lot of people talk about, but it's not the real root of why remote work is existing. I believe remote work exists for two reasons. Number one, internet penetration is increasing worldwide, and even in the most remote regions. I know you have internet with projects like Starlink, putting satellites everywhere. And their competitors that's going to come, you will have internet pretty much everywhere in the world. So the first factor is infrastructure, internet. Number two, it's actually not really COVID that enabled remote work the most. What enabled remote work the most is AI bosses. Those platforms that provide freelance work and enable people to work remotely without having to have a boss next to you are really the biggest driver. Because you work on Slack, because you work on Monday.com, on all these tools that actually keep track of your task, deadline, etc. You don't need to have a boss behind you to whip you, right? And you don't need to have a machine to hammer something on, nail something on anymore, because again, your bosses are silicon bosses. They are those softwares that tells you what to do when. And there are those platforms that gives you freelance work opportunities, which you can do from your home if you want, or from the beach, right? So silicon bosses, being softwares or AIs or platforms giving people jobs, are the biggest driver of this remote work. And it's not only for workplace, this is also in the education, right? When you think of all the softwares that have been used by kids to do their school homework and do these MOOC classes, it's also silicon, not bosses this time, but silicon teachers, right? If you go to a platform like Udemy, or if you send your kids to a platform like DIY.org or any other platforms that are for kids, the teacher is a silicon teacher, right? And that's, I think, the biggest factor that as a result enabled remote work during the pandemic as a trigger. But with or without the pandemic, remote work will have been enabled by these silicon bosses and these silicon teachers. So towards 2030, I think remote work are gonna continue to increase. Now, the question is, will it be pushing globalization or not? And I think we need to look at what could push globalization. Globalization is pushed by language. Languages that are spoken by everybody. And I think to answer that question towards 2050, we can only look at a geopolitical factor to answer, is language will be more global or not? And if we look at the way language is evolving around the world, I think towards 2050, Chinese will be one of the most spoken language in Africa, in Southeast Asia, for sure. Spanish used to be the second most spoken language, but due to the French penetration of African countries and schools, it seems like French will be top 2 or top 3 countries, because this is like, we're talking about 1 billion Africans that arrive on the market, and most of them will speak French and Chinese, not Spanish, and 3 Spanish. So I think the era of Pax Americana have ended, right? And historians will probably use this picture of this Afghanistan airports with the plane leaving and all these Afghans trying to catch the planes with the USA army retreating. I think this was a very important moment marking the end of the Pax Americana. So I think English as a language will be retreating. And for that reason, I would put my bet on hyper regional platforms enabling remote work. Probably platforms Chinese speaking, platform Spanish speaking, platform English speaking, platform with their own regions. I think this is how I see the future of work. I don't see it's going to be as global as 2010. I think we're going back to the Cold War. And for that reason, technology will follow and be more regional. But again, that's just my 2 cents. But I'm setting up my personal investments towards that direction.
I think it's really interesting. You mentioned obviously around AI, the AI tutor, or the AI boss. Also it's I can remember the last time, albeit a couple of years ago now, but when I was in last time I was in China, anyone who whenever I tried to book a Didi car, I was having an AI conversation with a driver who has an AI boss. He was talking to me in Chinese, I was talking to him in English. And for the purposes of our business transaction, we were having a fluent conversation with each other through that app interface. And obviously, one of the things I think one of the things this brings me on to is also that idea of and the big question I think rolls around everywhere around AI. But then if it's an AI boss, does that mean automation? And automation is a big topic. I think you and I actually share quite similar views on this. Whereas obviously we've seen the doomsday in Switzerland talking about the theoretical possibility of every job being automated. But what is your opinion, John? I know it's something you've written extensively about. What is your opinion about what automation is going to do, and maybe the value of human characteristics in the job, and how to, I think that's something that certainly from a teacher's perspective, that's incredibly valuable to understand.
So Firstly, the first thing I'm thinking now when we're doing this together is I think we should do this adaptability quotient together, Chris. Maybe Adaptivity can help BSD to create something, and that would be interesting. And I think this adaptability quotient will help people to not be too scared of automation. Okay, because yes, the past 10 years, we've heard a lot about how we're going to replace everything. We're going to be obsolete. But through my understanding of what future of work will look like in 2050, I've understood one thing. Very important thing is automation is only possible if energy is cheaper than human labor. And towards 2050, unless we really crack nuclear fusion, energy price gonna increase a lot. So not to say you're safe, not everybody is safe. I think I've shared the graphs of the studies, 10 minutes ago, of the areas which are forecasted by McKinsey to be safe and the others that will be automated. But basically, automation is really come down to how much energy you need to power this robot or this software or this AI, right? And usually it's consumed a lot of energy, which energy cost is going to increase drastically. So I think first parameter should make some people chill out a little bit, right? Secondly, it's really much about frequency of usage of these automations, right? So because the cost of energy gonna be high, powering those robots gonna be only possible for high valuable goods, right? So if you're doing something that is not a high valuable good, then as a business case, it won't be interesting to automate that part. And this is why you can see on the graph we shared, blue colors will be increasing by 12% from 2016 to 2030, because the goods they are facilitating to transact and produce are not valuable enough for robots or softwares to take over, or because it would be too costly to create a robot or an automation system that will actually replace them in their complex tasks, right? So I think towards 2050, we will still have a lot of human, and thanks God, we'll have a lot of human needs for very complex tasks that are, with hands still, like taking care of elders, for example, doing food, waiters, and all these things that have complex environment with other humans mainly. Now, if it's on a factory or warehouse, yeah, I mean, our truck driver, of course, you can already know it's not a job of the future. And if you didn't know, just watch more episodes of South Park, right? It's been 10 years that are talking about this, right? So yeah, I believe we should not be too scared of automation because of these two factors. Number one is energy costs gonna drive up, and you're just seeing a glimpse of it with Ukraine. But trust me, this is just a glimpse of it. Electricity in some countries have increased 600% last year for business. So the reason why electricity is not crazy expensive in some countries is mainly because governments are paying subsidies and subsidizing the electricity cost for houses and families. But in reality, the B2B prices is very, very fluctuant. So that's number one. Number two is complex tasks with complex environments, with humans interacting with other humans, will always be more expensive and too expensive to have robots playing in these fields. That's where we won't see things like robots walking in the streets, or those type of stuff that easily, but we'll see a lot of robots in factories and closed environments which have less complexity to handle. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think that's that, you know, that very much answers, and it's, you know, something I've seen is not yet, as well as that energy consequence, of course, is the what you mentioned, geopolitics earlier, also sociopolitics and local politics, where, you know, in terms of government, unless there's both also a, you know, a financial but also a socio-political rationale. When we look at the economy like Japan, it's they can't afford to not have the humans gainfully employed, and so, and to that point, it's what are the roles that the humans are going to be in, what are the roles that the robots are going to be in, and how are they going to support this enormous aging population, and how are they going to balance their books in purely economic terms. If we automate people out of the workforce, we don't receive tax or income tax from them. And so certainly, again, if you're an educator and you're listening to this, and your students are saying, you know, where do I go? These are some of the things that you want to be mindful of. I'll also share, Jan mentioned about Adaptivity, which is an organization that he is an investor in, and they have
and
a really
cool, Chris.
and myself as well. But hands open here. But the one of the things that's really cool with Adaptivity is that there's a digital capability questionnaire that you can do on that website, and it can give you some guidance. And that organization that's really on the cutting edge of looking at the applications of artificial intelligence and mentorship and guidance. So I will share that. A final question, because we're coming up towards the latter stages, and it's one actually from the chat here that says that during the pandemic, there was a huge visibility on the lack of access students had to digital solutions. And so the question is, John, how are you seeing companies adapting to growing increases in the digital divide? And how are you seeing companies providing solutions where, you know, people who've got access to these digital technologies are at an advantage, and people that don't have access to digital technologies are at a disadvantage? You know, have you seen any good ideas, good solutions towards this in the business world or in education as well?
Sorry, can you detail what you mean here?
So what we're seeing here is an example could be, you know, a simple example, and something we've mentioned earlier, in the last couple of years, students in schools, you know, the catchment area of a school can be very large. And if we think of a public school district, it can be huge. And obviously the catchment of that will represent many, many different students from many, many different backgrounds, whether that be economic, whether it be language, etc. But one of the factors, for example, not all of the students within a school catchment or within an education system will have access to the internet, whereas other students will have access to the internet. And obviously that will often follow the lines of prosperity. And in these circumstances, so there's been a big theme about the access to internet connectivity for students. And obviously I'm sitting in Hong Kong, which is a place that has maybe very good quality access for students to internet connectivity. But when we look at countries that have students in rural communities that they you know, maybe the internet still hasn't penetrated that far, you know, what are the leading lights and what are the leading business solutions that you're seeing for solving these sort of digital inequalities?
Yeah, I think I will take it on the other side. I think what I see is really there's digital pollution happening for the lowest class of the society, and there is digital filtering for the highest caste of the society. I'm going to give you an example. You're going to understand very quickly what I mean. If today you are higher up demographic, you can pay YouTube Premium and have no ads. Done. So that's an example. Another example is Mark Zuckerberg is not giving his kids iPads or iPhones, right? And I've heard a lot of the billionaires in tech are really protecting their children to have access to the internet until a certain age, or to have access to phones and iPhones and apps until a certain age. So that's also a clue for what is the real inclusion and exclusion. So I see that we are excluding people from adaptivity and adaptability if we are polluting their brain with content that is useless for them to become more adaptable, right? And hence we are keeping them into these castes where they consume diverse, they consume entertainment, they consume games, they consume advertising, but they're not really having time anymore to learn and to upskill themselves. So I wouldn't see the internet penetration as a problem for inclusion. I will see the filtering of internet content as a problem for inclusion. And I think that's something you've never heard of. And I want to talk a lot more about that when I have kids, but for now I don't. So, but I'm really considering to grow my kids in a forest or something. And I'm sharing those type of discussion with some very rich people who did the move, and they are blocking their kids to have access to iPhone until they're like 10 years old. And I think this is interesting because it's not the lack of internet that is the problem, is the abundance of polluted internet content that take out hours of time for population in the emerging markets. In Thailand, we are 6.2 hours per day spent on Facebook on average. This is the biggest average in the world. People spend their days and life. I mean, they're sleeping 8 hours. They're awake 12 hours, and they're eating Facebook stupid contents, and TikTok for 6 hours. So what life is this? And how you're gonna upskill yourself to become a data scientist if you spend 6 hours watching Facebook videos or TikTok, right? I think this is the biggest factors we will see of exclusion, and that will be the way mobility between society will be highly reduced with that. I think this is the highest risk, and I really hope educators like you will educate people, their parents and students, to be resilient and to be literate on how to use technology and smartphones towards that. I think that would be a course you should all have, actually. It's technology literacy, and this is not what is iPhone. It's not that. It's how to not use iPhone.
And do you know? It's interesting. We often, you and I often find common ground when we're thinking about these topics. And when back a number of years ago, when as BSD, when we said we'd come to that point it was in the 3rd year of our journey as an organization. And we said, we're going to create or go on the journey of creating our curriculum. And we had a very kind, a long and quite a deep maybe discussion about this fact, very much about, what is it truly what's truly important in the learning, what's truly important in the outcome. And, we said, it's not about the skills. It's not about even necessarily call it the soft skills. It's what we came down for in the actual curriculum. And the thing actually we've always tried to kind of bring into the way we run as a company, the way we treat each other, and the way that but also in the bedrock and the foundation of when we create educational experiences, the principle, what we call our CARE principles. And this was something, again, we created this now over 6 years ago. And the idea of CARE is to say, that we want every experience that a student has with BSD should be something that can reinforce curiosity, adaptability, resilience, and empathy. And we said the thing we've always had it as call it the guiding light of what we do with BSD is the idea of the values of the outcomes of learning, rather than necessarily, like you say, those skills which are all going to disappear anyway. So we're at the time today. Joanne, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being for speaking to our audience. I hope everyone who's been watching and listening to us today has found this a valuable and insightful session. Please send us your feedback. Tell us what more you'd like to know. These are going to be coming up regularly going forward. And yeah, without further ado, just thank you very much to everyone who's joined us today. And good afternoon now or good morning, depending on where you are in the world when you're listening to this right now. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.